Hello and welcome to this episode of How to Be a Great Player. Now, today's episode is a topic that was voted for by you, our Patreons, and presented by you, our subscribers, because it's something that's obviously of value to you. And it's a question of how do you play your statistics or your stats in role-playing games. So, the important thing to ask yourself is, firstly, are you a statistician or are you a storyteller? If you're a statistician and you like all your numbers to work and your maths must be solid and that your character, regardless of what system you're playing, will always triumph because they have the best combination of values, then this video is not for you. Your focus is on creating a number crunching game, and there's plenty of enjoyment to be had in that. This video is for you who like to tell a story, and the numbers are simply there to help you tell it in a more interesting way. So that's what we're going to look at, is how do we take the numbers, how do we take the values that these games use to make our game that much better as a player. Your GM is worrying about the story. You've got to worry about the story of your character and your representative numbers that need to help support that and that also need to challenge it. So when we look at numbers, most systems will have some kind of health value, they'll have some kind of intelligence value, and they'll have some kind of physical value. At the very least, I don't know of many systems that don't have at least those three values. As your health diminishes, so your character is supposedly getting more and more damaged. As your intellect goes higher or increases, so your character should be getting smarter and smarter. And as your strength increases, your character should be getting brawnier and stronger and more robust. Well, that's the theory anyway. And of course, the converse is true as well. As those numbers decrease, well, your intelligence, as it decreases, should get lower and lower, and your thought capacity and your planning should, in theory, go down. As your strength gets lower, you should get weaker and frailer and become more like a little old invalid than a brawny warrior. But different systems have got different types of mechanic in terms of the stat. And I'm not going to go through all of those potential options. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to say to you, how do you now use that? And often the question comes in at character creation, at least in terms of how do we interpret those numbers. So in terms of interpreting the numbers, a low number obviously will speak to some kind of lack, some kind of inefficiency, some kind of deformity, or some kind of social problem. If you have numbers, though, that are negative and you look at it and you go, well, my character is going to be frail. Well, that's one way of looking at it, but try and look at it in a different way. Yes, so your strength is low. Maybe you're not a frail character. Maybe you're just like everybody else. But your strength in terms of passing out at the first sign of danger, in terms of freaking out when you take a small cut on your hand. Perhaps it is not a physical manifestation, but a psychological manifestation that reduces your strength. Someone who can't possibly break her nails because, oh, well, that would be the end of her world, would statistically be represented as having a low strength, even though she might be able to open up that cookie jar on her own if push came to shove. Because she doesn't want to break her nails, she doesn't appear to be strong. On the other hand, a character who has a tremendous strength doesn't necessarily have to be an Arnold Schwarzenegger lookalike. He could be someone who is like you or me, and that strength comes more from being able to use his body or use her body in terms of forcing open a jar with leverage. So maybe it's more of an intelligence strength. Yes, I could hit you straight on in the chest area with my sword, but because I'm an intelligence strength, I'm actually going to slide it in between your ribs. My strength bonus still applies. I'm still doing damage to you, but I'm not doing it in the traditional I hit it until it's dead because I've got high strength. So the way that you can use your statistics to shape your character is to look at how you can reinterpret those values. How can you move away from the traditional interpretation of 5 pips in this and 3 proficiencies in that? How can you make that more of a narrative, and how can you make it more interesting so that when people ask you about your character, you can say, well, my character appears to be very strong, but that's only because they know how to use their body more efficiently. Or my character is not stupid, but has got so much going on in their mind that they actually can't focus enough to finish a sentence because they're busy thinking about how they're going to solve this equation. So they drift out of conversations. It doesn't mean that they're stupid. It just means that they weren't paying attention. So again, it's about how do you do that. Now, a lot of people ask and they'll say, oh, I'm a very intelligent person, but my character has got a below average intelligence. How do I role play that when the party is trying to solve some kind of problem and I know how I would do it, but my character doesn't? Well, initially you might just try to play a slightly slow, thick character who doesn't really get it and just sort of watches what goes on. But that's not going to be fun for you as the player. On the other hand, a character who sees what's going on but doesn't want to share that information because they're more concerned about something else that happened in the past or in the future, or that they are looking at, well, that's the obvious solution and I assume no one is going to use that because it's so obvious. They're obviously looking for something a lot more interesting. Or perhaps it's the character who is so terrified that they're going to say the wrong thing that even though they do know the answer, they just don't say it because, well, no one really listens to them anyway. Again, it's about trying to interpret how to use your stats to tell the story. And if you can't, and there are instances where you go, well, my character has got this very low intelligence and I'm just going to not give them the answers. On the other hand, I could try and think of ways that by accident, maybe I give them the answer. So if it's about cutting down a tree, maybe I go and lean against the tree and ask them whether trees naturally produce honey or if it's, just something that happens. It's still being a low intelligence character, but it's being played by a high intelligence character who can work out. Maybe I can give them some clues. Maybe I can add to the conversation. So that's the one way of using your stats to create a much more interesting character, is to look at the stats from a totally different perspective, and a perspective that maybe is not immediately apparent given the descriptor of the statistic. Now, the other side of the coin is, whilst you are rolling dice, how do those numbers now affect your character? Because you've got, say, penalties to your roll or you've got positives to your roll. And those somehow need to be interpreted, don't they? So instead of just saying, oh, well, I needed to get 16 and I only got 12, I fail, it's a case of saying, I know I can do it, but I just can't see it. I don't see it. Can anyone help me try and interpret this cryptic clue here? Because it's right on the tip of my tongue, but I can't see it on my tongue, so I don't know what the answer is. That's a better way to play your numbers. If it's a case of give me a percentile and you go, oh, well, I got 82% over 40. So that's a 40% pass. That's 4 successes or whatever the system might be. So I really get this. Again, it's about saying, I've seen this before. I was in a training exercise where this actual puzzle was presented to us. So I've actually solved this thing multiple times, and this is exactly how you do it. Now, we could use this to reset something, or GM, is there something that I can do because of my successes to enhance the trap or to deactivate the trap or to learn more about the people who created it? Don't just drive the stat or the number, drive the story and figure out how to use that to your advantage. So the rolling is always fun. I mean, you never know what's going to pop up. A natural 1, which in some systems is a calamitous failure. How can I use this? Well, as I'm moving forward, I'm sweating so much because it's summer outside that my glasses actually slip off of my face. And what's the outcome, GM? And the GM might say, well, what did you roll? And you say, I rolled a 1. The GM should pick up on the fact that you are describing this, preferably see, because you should be using dice that everyone at the table can see anyway, and then be able to roll with it. So you're turning it into a story. You're not just turning it into a mathematical, oh, well, if you got within this range to that range, X happens. If you got this, Y happens. Now, there are systems out there, and they're not on this table, where the dice help determine the narrative outcome. And although these are innovative systems, I personally find that they are being too prescriptive in terms of everything must now be a story or get boiled down to a number. I'd rather have everything as a number that I can then use to tell my story with. But that's personal preference. Our stats need to define our characters because that's the type of game that we're playing. Our characters, however, need to be the ones that are in control of those numbers, and we, as the creators, are the ones who are in control of our characters. So we must look at numbers not necessarily just as a mathematical function, but as a narrative function, and plumb them to see what stories we can get out. Why would this character who grew up in the wild have a low strength? Surely they're going to be chopping trees and hauling wood and milking cows and doing all those kinds of wonderful things. Not sitting around behind a table. If so, why were they sitting around behind a table, and what family environment allowed them to do so? If our starship captain has got poor tactics, how did she become a captain in the first place? If she's got fantastic astrophysics skills, how did she become our captain? What was the progression? What was the story that got her from point A to point B? Again, informed by our numbers, but not controlled by them. And something to also bear in mind is if the GM asks you, do you have a certain amount of points in this or in that, and you don't, it's simply a case of saying, I haven't got any training in that. I don't know how to read. Never taught. If you see someone else playing their stats in terms of narrative and saying something like, I've never been taught to read, what a fantastic opportunity for your character, if they can read, to say, hey, in our downtime, I'm going to teach you how to read. What a lovely bonding experience. And there's very few mechanics out there that exist that allow characters to transfer knowledge in this kind of way. So it's something to think about, to chat to your GM and say, listen, if we role-play training and we're doing it between each session, can't we all just get a few points or pips or marks or whatever the game system is in that particular field, because we have been working on it. Yes, we haven't leveled up or gained experience, but the point is we're telling a good story, aren't we? I hope that helps in terms of giving you a little bit of light on how to interpret stats and how to use stats to look at things in a totally different way, and to get your fellow players to go, oh, I never thought that you could use charisma like that. Yes, I suppose you could be a very pretty person, but if you've got an abrasive personality or a horrid laugh, or you tend to touch people a lot whilst they're talking to you, which can be seen as offensive, and that's why your charisma is actually low. So you're quite a pretty person, you're just a hideous creature internally. Or you are not very wise, are you? No, well, actually, I am very wise, but I thought we were going to try and experiment with something new. I thought we were going to go in a new direction. I didn't really think, however it may be. If you found this useful, hit that like button. If you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. And if you have any questions on other topics you'd like me to cover, head on over to www.greatgamemaster.com, where you can now list your questions for topics in case I miss them on the comments below. And if you are a Patreon of ours, you can then actually vote on which topics you would like to see handled first before all of the rest, as in the case of this particular video. So until next time, I wish you the very happiest of playing.